Hi guys, welcome to my channel where we talk about everything from tech to films and all the fun stuff in between. It's been a decade and this one amazing gadget, the Apple iPad, single-handedly introduced a new category called post-PC devices and ruled over it for 10 years straight. Unless it is the really low-priced Amazon Fire tablet, 10 years and still the iPad hasn't got a worthy long-lasting opponent. In today's video, let's look at all the iPad models ever introduced and take a walk down the memory lane and see what's changed through the years. I do not have all the devices here guys, but I will show you the ones which I have, including that very first one. And before we start, please show your support to this channel by subscribing guys, as your support means everything to me and I can continue making interesting and fun videos like these. So the year was 2010. It started on a bleak note with a massive earthquake hitting Haiti, but also was the year of the biggest man-made structure ever to be unveiled in Dubai called the Burj Khalifa. And it was also the year where Steve Jobs showed us this newest device and called it the iPad and said it was magical. All tech purists were skeptical, wondering the need for such kind of a device, but really, that was the one which changed the course of history. The simplicity, ease of use, extremely long battery life, and the size made this device really magical. So here I have the original iPad in cellular version with 32 gigs of storage. This was the mid-range storage option as upon launch, Apple offered the 16GB version as well. So Apple had three storage options, the 16, 32 and 64GB, both in Wi-Fi only and Wi-Fi with cellular connectivity options. I was one of the early ones who got this device on launch day itself. I had the base 16GB model, so this one is not mine. I borrowed it from a friend of mine, and I also got the Apple silicone case along with my iPad when I first bought it. The device weighed in at 680 grams, with the cellular version at a whopping 730 grams. The device had Apple's custom A4 ARM chip, clocking it at 1 GHz with 256 megs of RAM. The screen resolution was 138 ppi and there were absolutely no cameras on this device at all. They seem like pretty low specs now, but back in 2010, this device performed very efficiently without a single hiccup or lag. In fact, it crushed the entire netbook market single-handedly, which was just getting popular at that time. Heading over to 2011, it was the year that finally brought down Bin Laden and also showed us how fairy tale weddings look like if they happened in real life with the royal wedding. Apple also took its customers' views into consideration and introduced the iPad 2. The iPad shaved off nearly 80 grams of its weight and got better and curvier designs, and it came in two colors, black and white. Still getting the same 16, 32 and 64GB memory, this is my iPad 2 guys in white color, 64GB, and yes, it is still functional. Even after 9 years. Actually, when I was buying this, I wanted to settle for that mid-level 32GB of storage, but on launch day, it sold off like hotcakes and the PC world near my house only had the white 64GB in stock. So I had to stretch my budget a little, but I was actually glad that I did so, as my original iPad only had a measly 16GB and more memory was always a very good option, even today. The internals of the iPad 2 also get updated with the first dual-core A5 chip making its appearance, along with double the RAM at 512 MB. A serious performance boost this was. The iPad also gets the much-needed camera lenses, both front and back. The resolution on them was very low. The front one was just VGA quality and the back one was 0.7 million pixels. But yes, they were present on the device and you could use that to video call basically. Next is 2012, which marks the year of Higgs boson and Queen's Diamond Jubilee. The third iteration of the iPad gets a serious performance boost with quad-core A5X processor, 1 gig of RAM, and also gets a Retina screen at 264 ppi, and Apple also adds in 128 gigs of storage as the max one. But they still keep that 16 gig lower storage option. Updates to the front camera as well, which gets 5 million pixels with HD recording at 30 frames per second, but the front one still remains the same VGA quality. It also gains around 50 grams of weight back, mostly due to that Retina screen. But the iPad 3 is short-lived as Apple decides to update it in like 6 months. So the same year, 2012, sees the iPad 4, which gets updated internals, and I did buy this one. I sold it off a few months to buy the next one, so I don't have it with me, but this iPad was the heaviest one which I used after that first generation one, as it weighed in at 650 grams, and you could definitely feel the heft, especially comparing it to the iPad 2, which I still had at that time. The processor gets a bump to A6X, and the front camera also gets updated to 1.2 million pixels. Quick time jump here, guys. Apple still offers the same crappy 1.2 million pixel front camera even in its 7th gen iPad, which was released in September 2019. Talk about old tech, yeah? I think this is as old as it can get on a modern device. Also, Apple didn't just stop with the iPad 4. 2012 also was the birth of iPad mini, a smaller, lighter 7.9-inch screen size form factor iPad as opposed to the iPad's usual 9.7-inch screen size. The internals are powered by A5 dual-core processor with 512 MBs of RAM, and the camera at the back is 5 million pixels and 1.2 million pixels on the front. But what made this device truly stand out is that 310 grams of weight, even though it packed mostly the same internals as its bigger brother, the iPad 4. That weight made this tablet the lightest and the most powerful iPad your money could buy. 2012 sure was the year of iPads. Next is 2013, the year of protests and violence in Egypt, the welcoming of royal baby in the British royal household, and the demise of our favorite Fast and Furious actor Paul Walker. This is the year where Apple redefined the iPad as well. Gone is that 650-gram weight and thick bezels. Apple shrinks all of them down, launching the newer iPad with thinner bezels, 469 grams of weight, and calls it the iPad Air. Seriously, every other 9.7-inch iPad felt like a brick in comparison, and I sold off my iPad 4 just a few months after buying that to put some money towards the new iPad Air. I got it in white color with the 64GB storage option, and this was my main iPad for the next 6 years until I upgraded to the iPad Air 3 in 2019. The iPad Air gets Apple's A7 64-bit architecture chip under its hood, and it was a serious performer back then. The Mini also gets a boost to A7 processor with 1 GB of RAM and a seriously impressive 326 ppi screen resolution, making it on par with its bigger brother, the iPad Air. It does gain in a little weight at around 330 grams, but still it's feather light compared to even the iPad Air. Next is 2014, the year of the infamous Ebola outbreak. Seems like we never learn from our mistakes, right? And then the entire commercial aircraft along with all its passengers and crew goes missing without a trace. On the iPad front, Apple releases an update to the iPad Air in the form of the iPad Air 2 with even thinner profile at 6.1 mm and lighter weight at 437 grams. The physical mute switch gets a boot, but the processor gets bumped up to A8X with 2 gigs of RAM, and Apple introduces its first laminated display and anti-reflective coating on an iPad. Apple also adds in Touch ID to the iPad Air 2, making it one of the first iPads to have this feature. The back camera also gets boosted to 8 million pixels while the front stays the same. Apple also introduces a new gold color option for the iPad Air 2. See, this is the iPad which still supports the iPad OS launched in 2019. So you see, it is a solid iPad with very substantial updates. I couldn't buy this one as selling the iPad every year was making me lose a lot of money, so I kept my iPad Air 1. The Mini 3 also was introduced that year, but it didn't get the updates which it deserved, as Apple was heavily focused on the iPad Air 2. The Mini 3 gets the Touch ID and a new gold color, but that's it. No processor or RAM or screen updates. Next is 2015, the year when Nepal got ravaged by earthquakes and NASA's spacecraft does a close flyby of the planet Pluto, the first ever man-made spacecraft to do so. Apple also takes a drastic turn and introduces a beast of a device, calling it the iPad Pro. It came in a massive 12.9-inch screen size with 5.6 million pixel variable refresh rate display, 4 gigs of RAM with 64-bit architecture, A9X processor and quad speaker setup for that true stereophonic sound. The rear camera was an 8 million pixel iSight camera, but the strength still stayed at that same 1.2 million pixels. It also had a smart connector on its side, allowing you to dock Apple's dedicated keyboard accessory, and Apple also introduced a stylus device and called it Apple Pencil, which connected and charged via the Lightning port. The iPad Mini 4 also gets updated with fully laminated display and A8 processor with 2 gigs of RAM, and the rear camera also gets updated to 8 million pixels. Next, we are in year 2016, the year when American people voted for Donald Trump to lead their country, and the year where Russians shot down a passenger flight leading to the death of all passengers and crew. Wow. Every year we humans make sure to mess up in the most ginormous way possible, right? On the Apple front, they released the 9.7-inch version of the iPad Pro, same power as its bigger 12.9-inch brother, but with only 2 gigs of RAM instead of 4. The rear camera gets bumped up to 12 million pixels with 4K recording, and finally Apple pays attention to that front camera and makes it a decent 5 million pixel shooter with 720p HD recording option. Next is 2017, the year of the famous Me Too movement and iPad Pros. The second-gen iPad Pros launch with bigger one staying the same at 12.9-inch screen size, but the smaller one gets bumped to 10.5 inches instead of the usual 9.7 inches. The processor is the A10X Fusion chip with 4 gigs of RAM on both the versions. Both the displays get the excellent 120Hz refresh rate, and the camera gets updated as well, with the rear one at 12 million pixels capable of 4K recording and the front one at 7 million pixels with full HD recording capability. The Pros start from about $650, so Apple introduced a new base level iPad for $329. This is the direct successor of the 4th gen iPad launched in 2012, but with the form factor of that iPad Air Generation 1. With A9 processor under the hood, 2 gigs of RAM and Touch ID, but without the laminated display or stereo speakers or the thinner profile of the iPad Air 2. This iPad certainly looked very tame in front of the powerful iPad Pros, but getting a full-blown iPad experience for $300 price tag was a sure winner. Next is year 2018, the year of another royal wedding, and this is the year where the iPad, for the first time since its conception, gets a complete redesign. The iPad Pro's Generation 3. Gone are the thick bezels and the home button. Instead, now you have thinner bezels with Face ID. This amazing face auth system which Apple introduced, which uses depth sensing to recognize your face and unlock the device. The screen still retains that brilliant 120Hz refresh rate, and the internals get updated with a 7nm architecture based A12X Bionic chip. The storage option also goes up to a whopping terabyte, with the terabyte one getting 6 gigs of RAM instead of 4 gigs. The Lightning port and the 3.5mm headphone jack also gets a boot in favor of a single USB-C port. This iPad Pro is really more powerful than many laptops launched around the same time and is an amazing product from Apple. We also get the buttery smooth 2nd gen Apple Pencil, which clicks onto the side magnetically and also pairs and charges in that way. The low-end iPad also gets an update with A10 processor and support for 1st gen Apple Pencil. Then we head over to 2019, the year of Avengers Endgame, and the relaunch of my long-lost friend, the iPad Air. Apple brings back the iPad Air, bridging the gap between the most expensive and powerful iPad Pros and that cheaper entry-level iPad, giving us the iPad which makes more sense to buy and the one which gives you perfect value for money. My channel is full of videos covering this iPad Air in every possible way. I will leave a link down to that playlist below, guys, so you can check it out. With a super fast A12 processor on board, 3 gigs of RAM in a very thin profile, anti-glare coating, laminated display, 8 million pixel rear camera, 7 million pixel front cameras, and support for that Apple 1st gen pencil with a smart connector on the side, allowing support for Apple's keyboard accessory. This really is the iPad most of us need and is an excellent value for money. 2019 also sees a speed bump to that entry-level iPad, which gets 3 gigs of RAM instead of 2 gigs, and the screen size also goes up to 10.2 inches from 9.7 and gets that smart connector on the side for Apple's keyboard accessory support. It also gets the Apple Pencil Generation 1 support as well. The iPad mini, on the other hand, in its 5th gen iteration, becomes as powerful as the iPad Air. It gets A12 Bionic chip with 3 gigs of RAM, the same 7 million pixels, 8 million pixel camera, and the support for Apple Pencil. It just doesn't get the smart connector on the side for keyboard support, but in every other way, it is as powerful as the iPad Air. And then we finally head over to the current year, 2020. The year when Apple was supposed to host its March iPad event at Steve Jobs Theater to introduce the new iPad Pros and convince us about why the iPad Pros need a new camera system and the LiDAR sensor, or tell us how fast the new 8-core A12Z chip on board is going to be. But none of these happened, and Apple quietly launched the iPad Pros online due to the biggest mistake yet of humanity, which led to the outbreak of COVID-19 coronavirus. This year will be remembered in history along with events like World War I or World War II or genocides or any other darkest points in human history. It's almost been 4 months, and unfortunately we do not see the light at the end of the tunnel yet, and cases of deaths are rising every day. Sorry guys, I couldn't finish this video on a high note, but despite all the mistakes we have done, we still show proof that humanity is not lost in us. We prove that in every way, right from that healthcare workers who are risking their lives every day working the front line, to supermarket employees who are making sure that we have enough to eat by risking their own safety, to all those pharmacists, teachers, transport workers, all others who do not have the privilege to stay home, who are doing their part for others despite the risk. What more proof of humanity do we need? We wage wars, draw borders, destroy resources, but at the same time we come together in the face of danger and stand strong for others. Wish we only did the later part and not the former part, and maybe this pandemic will bring us ever so close as one united, unbroken, powerful human chain. I hope and pray with all my heart that this is the case. So I end this video on a hopeful note, guys. Let's all do our part and stay home with our beloved Apple or Android gadgets and save lives. Thanks a lot for taking this trip with me through time, and the remarkable journey of a wonderful Apple product. Until next time, stay home, stay safe, guys. I will see you in my next video. Bye for now.